Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be recommending fantasy romance books based on spice level. Alright guys, so I have noticed that typically when I recommend a fantasy romance book, one of the first questions I get asked is, how spicy is it? How much smut is in the book? How steamy is it? So for this video, I'm going to be recommending fantasy romance books, but I am going to be sorting it by spice level. So we're going to start off with books that aren't very spicy, but have more of like a YA fantasy feel, and then ending with like the smutty fantasy romance, and then all the books in between. So I hope you guys find this video helpful. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these fantasy romance books. Alright, so starting off with YA fantasy romance, or young adult fantasy romance. So these books are geared towards a younger audience, and although there might be a relationship, it's not normally the primary focus of the book. Normally there's a lot more going on, and if there does happen to be like a spicy time, it's not explained in a lot of detail, it's not very explicit, it's more of you just kind of know what's happening. So I feel like there are YA fantasy romances that I really enjoyed. I have two that I'm going to talk about in this video. So the first one is The Prison Healer, and this is by Lynette and Noni. So I've compared this to like the middle school version of Savage Lands, and really they're not that similar, but they do both take place in like a prison. So we are following Kiva, and when she is very young, she is separated from her family, and she ends up being imprisoned in this prison known as Zalandov. And no one ever survives very long in this prison. Luckily, Kiva is very good at healing, and she is able to become like the prison medic, and she survives for a decently long time. So one day, a rebel queen is captured and taken to this prison, and Kiva sees a note in the rebel queen's pocket, and it says, "We are coming for you," and it's from Kiva's family. And it also says, "Keep the queen alive." Now, Kiva is like, oh no, this queen has just been sentenced to do these elemental trials that no one has ever survived, and also the queen is really in like a weakened state. So Kiva takes it upon herself and decides, I'm gonna go do these elemental trials in the queen's place, and it is that story. And there is also a romance in this that I really loved, and this is just really fun. So if you wanna kind of get your feet wet in terms of fantasy romance, I would definitely check this out. Another one that I love that is like the perfect starter book for YA fantasy is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. So I've compared this to ACOTAR. I actually have a full spoiler-free review of this book I will leave in the cards and the description, but this is following Bree. Bree lives in this world where people can make deals with fairies, and she wants nothing to do with that, because typically if you make a deal with a fairy, bad things happen to you, so she just kind of wants to stay away from fae overall. Unfortunately, her younger sister ends up being kidnapped by the king of the Unseelie Court. So Bree has to travel to the Fey lands, and when she gets there, she meets the prince of the Seelie Court and then a gang of misfits from the Unseelie Court, and she has to find a way to save her sister. So this is the first book. I love this book so much, but you know what? I loved the second book, These Twisted Bonds, just as much. I think this was such a good duology. I honestly wish it was a little bit longer. I feel like this book definitely could have been stretched out into 2 books, but overall, so good. So if you have not read These Hollow Vows and you want to start out reading YA fantasy romance, definitely pick it up. It is one of my absolute favorites. All right, so this next grouping is a little bit more spicy. This is for fantasy lovers that still want fantasy. They still want a decent amount of world building, and they want a really good story. They just want their relationship to be a little bit more explicit and have a little bit more spice. So I have 2 books as well. First up, we have Entreat Me by Grace Draven. I just finished reading this book. I give it 4.5 stars. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but still feels entirely unique and its own. It has the nods to the original Beauty and the Beast, but I just love the gothic vibe of this book. So this is following 2 sisters that are in or starting to form a relationship with 2 men that are cursed, that are in this castle that is completely frozen in time, and there is so much more going on with the story, but just know I really enjoyed it. And I thought the overall story, besides the romance, was done very well. And even the side characters in this book were all very fleshed out. I loved all of the side characters. I just really enjoyed this overall as a story. You could also check out Radiance by Grace Draven. That's another one of her books that I really enjoyed. So definitely pick this up. And then another one is Daughter of No Worlds. So I actually vlogged reading this book. I didn't enjoy this as much as a lot of other people have. This is a friends to lover story. I think that's why I didn't enjoy it. But this is an amazing fantasy. If you are looking for fantasy romance and you want battles and you want action and you want politics and still a bit of a romance, highly recommend. This is following Tisana. She is sold into slavery, and when she is a slave, she is forced to perform this like performative magic, and she's trying to save up enough money to buy her freedom. Unfortunately, when she goes to her master to try to buy her freedom, he refuses. She is able to escape, but she decides that she needs to go back and save her people. So she ends up going to this order that is like an order of people that do magic and requests their help, and they say, fine, first you have to become part of this order. And it's her story. I've only read the first book in this series. The first one was really good. The relationship is very, very slow burn, and it is friends to lovers, so not necessarily my thing. But if you want a book that sounds like what I just described, I would definitely check this out. I do plan on eventually continuing with this series. All right, so this next tier is spicy fantasy romance. So this is the tier that I love. So these are books that have an equal amount of plot and story, but also the relationship is really one of the focal points of the story, and the steamy scenes are described in a decent amount of detail. So all of these books that I'm about to talk about are pretty popular, so I'm gonna go through them pretty quickly. These are all like my absolute favorite series. First up, we have the classic, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, I am only going to include A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Wings and Ruin, and A Court of Frost and Starlight, maybe, in this tier. Court of Silver Flames, that's in the next one. But this, if you don't know what the story is about, we are following Farah. She's this human girl. She lives on the border of the Fae lands. One day, she accidentally kills a Fae, and for payment for that, she has to go live with the High Lord of the Spring Court. And it goes from there. There are wars, there are bat boys. It's my favorite series of all time. It is so good. So highly recommend if you have not read this. This was really my intro into fantasy romance. This was the first one I read, and then I became completely addicted. So highly, highly recommend. Then after that, we have From Blood and Ash. I know this is the War of the Two Queens. It's the fourth book. I didn't feel like taking and redoing my display behind me. But From Blood and Ash is following Poppy. She is the maiden. She has been raised her entire life in isolation. One day she decides to sneak out, dresses up in disguise, goes to this tavern, and when she gets there, she meets Hawk, who is the newest member of the Rise Guard, and he kind of changes her entire life, and we see their relationship blossom, and it's such a good paranormal fantasy romance. We have vampires, we have werewolves, and just the first book, From Blood and Ash, is just so, so good. There's also a companion series, A Shadow in the Ember and A Light in the Flame. I forget exactly what that series is called, but also just as good and highly recommend. And then next up, we have Zodiac Academy by Carolyn Peckman and Susan Valenti. So this is following two girls. On their 18th birthday, they find out that they are actually Fae royalty, and that they have to go to the Zodiac Academy in order to claim their inheritance. Unfortunately, when they get there, they find out that there are these 4 celestial heirs that are already ruling the school, and they're going to make the girls' lives pretty much hell. So this is actually a bully fantasy romance, paranormal romance. We have vampires, werewolves, dragon shifters, and it's so good. I will say the one caveat with the series, and I always warn people, is this first book is by far the weakest in the series. The writing isn't great. It's a little cringy at times. I definitely would give it till at least book 2 before you pass judgment. I absolutely love the series, but just know that going in. Book 1 is not the best. And then last up, we have the Bonds That Tie series by Bree. So this is a Why Choose fantasy romance, and we are following our main character, and she lives in a world where people have bonded mates. So one woman might have 5 or 6 bonded mates, and they all have a relationship together. And at the beginning of our story, our main character, I think her name's Ollie, is in the car with her mother, and her mother's bonded. There's a car accident, and everyone dies except for Ollie. And Ollie, instead of going back to her bonded mates like she should, she ends up running away. And we find out that she's actually running from something. So her bonded are very upset with her, and eventually, years later, when they find her and drag her back, they have a lot to discuss. So it is a bully romance, and it is so good. I love it. I loved all of the different bonded mates. You get to find out a lot about their characters. They all have certain strengths, and they all have such distinct personalities. And then Ollie herself is just a crazy strong main character, and I just love it. So all of the books I just mentioned, like I said, are very heavy in terms of steam, but also they have an overarching story going on, and they're just absolutely divine. Highly recommend. Definitely, if you want spicy fantasy romance, I think those books are the way to go. And this last tier is you want some fantasy with your spice. These books are just super spicy, super erotic, and still have some fantasy elements. Also, nothing wrong with that. I love all of the books I'm about to talk about. So first up, I am going to put A Court of Silver Flames in this category, which I know is going to make some people mad, but I will say, compared to all of her other books, this book is definitely the spiciest she's ever written, and some of the scenes did make me blush. I will say this does also have a really good plot and really good character development. This is the Nesta story from A Court of Thorns and Roses, so I do highly recommend reading that original series before jumping into this. And I thought I was going to hate Nesta, and this book changed my mind. So character development was spot on, but also these spicy scenes in this were just another level for SJM. But definitely check this out if you want a super spicy fantasy romance. And then next up is The Never King. This is kind of like novella length by Nikki and Crowe. This is a Peter Pan reimagining. So Peter Pan ends up kidnapping the descendants of Wendy Darling on their 18th birthday, and he takes them to Neverland, where him and the Lost Boys all have a fun time. This is kind of like reverse harem. It is wide shoes, and I guess it's reverse harem, but it is so spicy. Oh my goodness. For such a tiny book, it packs a lot. I really enjoyed this. I finished the second book. I still have to read the third book, but definitely if you want a really, really spicy Peter Pan reimagining, check this out. And then last up is a book that I've talked a lot about, and this is actually Queen of Rotten Pain. The first book is King of Flesh and Bone, I believe, and it is a dark fantasy romance. Check trigger warnings. But you are following this girl that lives in a world where bodies, after people die, the bodies don't rot, they actually reanimate. So people are praying to the god of flesh and bone to stop this from happening, and he's really not listening. One day, our main character ends up being dragged into his kingdom, and humans are never supposed to go there, so the King of Flesh and Bone is pretty intrigued, and he ends up making this human girl his pet, and it's like their relationship. Once again, trigger warnings, there's non-con. At one point, the girl's trying to escape, the god breaks both of her legs, and never feels remorse throughout the two books I read. So it's definitely not like the bad guy slowly turns good. He never really redeems himself at all. This is more of just their love story, and they do some very problematic things. So know that going in. But if you want spice, and like starting from page 2, I think you will really enjoy this series. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching my spicy fantasy romance recommendations. Please let me know what is your favorite spicy fantasy romance. Let me know down in the comments below. And I said this already, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!